Okay, and today I want to just basically show you some of the basics about replacing the sunroof crank. I mean, it's very simple, but if you ran into what I did where the thread's stripped and you need to remove all this, this will be helpful to show how all this comes apart and how you can access the cassette underneath and all of that. Hopefully you have a straightforward job where you're just removing this screw and pulling off the plastic piece, and then there's two screws holding the plastic handle in place, and it's very simple to do. But with mine, like at the factory they installed red thread locker, which is permanent or high strength, and the top of the head sheared off, and so I'm going through the whole process of replacing the crank and pulling out the cassette and pulling off all this panel, which in order to get to the cassette, and drilling out the threads so that I can reinstall it correctly. And so I hope this helps somebody. Okay, the first step in removing the handle, if it's already fallen off or if it's broken or cracked underneath, they usually crack in there because of the metal. It cracks over time and it fatigues, and basically the sunroof gets harder to move back and forth as time ages. You need to go ahead and remove this screw and pull this cover off so you have access to the crank underneath, and it's held in by two screws. Okay, the next step is to remove this handle here, and it's held in by two screws. Hopefully, if you're most people, you can just take these screws out and you won't have any problem. They were put in with red thread locker or Loctite at the factory. I was able to get one out. The other one is stuck, and I've had to drill it out, and basically I had to break this plastic piece off, and I got the handle's already off, but because it's the broken piece, this is the piece I've already installed. But I'm doing it backwards because I didn't cover that part in the video. But since the handle's gone, I ended up breaking the little plastic piece, and so I could start removing the cover. Here's the plastic piece, and as you can see, I had to break it free to get it out of the way so I could remove the rest of the piece of plastic, and also start moving all the other components here so that I can drill this out better. Okay, here's the original crank. It's BMW, and I don't know if you can see that right there, but that's where it sheared off the top of that. I don't have the white piece with me right now, but here's some of the washers and the E-clip, and this is the new part. It's the Chinese MTC crank, but it has a little plastic piece and it's intact. And these right there are the holes that hold that in. I've gone ahead and lubricated all this with some of the super lube grease, and make sure that everything moves, and again, it's plastic friendly, so hopefully this will last a little bit longer. I mean, the quality's not as good, but this is basically retailing right now for about $65, and that one's retailing for $15 to $20. So it's that's a lot of extra money to pay for something that's pretty simple. Okay, next, in order to remove this cover right here, we have to loosen these two screws, and then this gently pries down and comes out this way. In order to remove this warning light panel, you just need to take a screwdriver and just kind of pry this out. If it's never been pulled out before, it may be kind of glued in here, and you just need to be careful and just gently work it all the way around, and then there'll be a cable behind it, and you can disconnect the cable and remove it. Next part is to remove the sun visors. I've already taken this one out. Basically, as you loosen these two screws right here, you'll need to remove this little clip. It's also pulling out these two screws. I need to do this one next, and these hold this in place right here, along with the weather door stripping right here, and the door stripping right here, which has already been, I've already pulled that out. And then we have to pull off the sun visor, or the wind visor right here, or the wind deflector, I should say. And once we pull that out, we can get to the screws holding this part of the headliner part up here. The next step, in order to take off this headliner panel here, is that we have to remove this visor. In order to do this, you need to pop this pin out of this arm right here and swing it forward, and then this slides out of the hole. You need to do that for both sides. The next step to remove this wind visor right here is to remove all these screws, and this will come off. To remove this front panel, we need to pull out these two screws right here after we've taken off the wind deflector. To remove the cassette, all we do is we unscrew this screw, and then this cassette just drops right down. Okay, and here are the threads that I pulled out. Here are the threads that I pulled out, that I had drilled out and pulled out with the tweezers. Now I need to see what's left in there. I don't know if you can see there where there's still some left in there, and we have to get it out. Okay, this is the top front panel where the visors go into. I'd cracked this. I've gone ahead and I put some strips here and glued this in place, and I cracked this when I removed it, and I also kind of glued that back. What I also did too was I went ahead and put some vinyl protectorant on this, and I also put it on the visors over here as well. This is what I used, and it's highly recommended. It's has UVA protectant, and it really works well. I'm very pleased with it. What I also did with the visors too, up here I lubricated them. First I used this dry lube by Blaster. It says it's safe on plastics, and it's got PTFE, which is the scientific abbreviation for Teflon. And then I put some super lube grease, which is also plastic friendly, in there. These are under tension, but I want them to be able to move freely when you pull down the visor. And also sprayed some of the dry lube in here down there, so this will so they'll move freely and it won't crack because of stress, because they bind. Okay, here's the cassette, and basically what I did was I flushed it with the dry lube, the Blaster, and what I did was I sprayed it in here and then let it drain out through the sides of this. That got most of the crud out, and I kept on flushing it, and I turned this a little bit. You got to be careful though, because the gears are set in a certain way, and when you go to put it back into the car, you need to make sure that everything lines up correctly on that. But after I flushed it out pretty well, this kind of should dry up and not leave any residue, and hopefully not attract any dirt. And then what I did was I went again and used the super lube grease, and I greased all the pivot points. I guess it would be here, here, and then on the back side underneath this. You can pull this clip off with this is an E-clip and get underneath that gear. Grease here and then grease here. If you really needed to take this apart and clean this better, what you could do is take a drill and drill the tops of the rivet out, tap it out. What I would do is get a tap then go ahead and put a new put threads in there and find screws that would match for the thickness of this. And I would just do this one at a time until you and then replace each of the rivets with screws until you had all the screws in place. Then you could remove all the screws, and then you could pull this panel off and mark each of the gears. Has a set on the plastic, back panel here with this piece removed and how they went in place, so you would have them all lined up in the proper sequence, because there's some teeth here, and like I said, there's a way that these need to all go in place so that the roof will either remain in the rollback position or the uplift position, so to speak. But again, if this required servicing, for time constraints, I didn't do this. You need to be very careful. I think this is a very durable plastic, but because it's pushing 25 years plus, it is aging and it could crack very easily. So you want to be careful what kind of chemicals you use on it. This is supposed to be safe for plastics, so to speak, and this is supposed to be plastic friendly as well, so that's why I chose to use those. If you use petroleum jelly or something of that nature, or you use a solvent like carb cleaner, you're probably going to damage this and it could end up deteriorating and falling apart. So from that being said, but this has lubricated everything pretty well, and so it turns a lot better than it did, so it'd be a good idea to clean that out. Okay, right in here I've gone ahead, I hope you can see that, but I've cleaned most of the threads out. I drilled it and then was able to pull out the remaining threads from the previous screw. Okay, I hope you can see that, that I've gone ahead and drilled that out, the remaining threads that were left up in there from the screw that broke off. It will screw in there. It's not all the threads are there, but I got it as best as I could, so hopefully we should be able to use that. Okay, here's the screws that hold in the plastic piece to the handle, and I had to kind of rip that out, as you can see. Well, actually the head broke off after I drilled it. I stripped it, and you can see I ended up having to drill it out. For some reason at the factory they used red Loctite, or red thread locker, which is permanent or super high strength. I don't know why they really needed to use it. I think blue would probably be more than suffice, but that's what they used on it. I've gone ahead and cleaned the other screw, is still good, and I cleaned that with some nail polish remover, and I've got a replacement here that I'm going to go ahead and use. It's pretty much the same except for the heads a little, what is it, it's curved, it's not concave, but it's curved outward more or less. So I'm going to end up using those two screws right here, and then I'll probably put some blue Loctite on them. Okay, and here's the screws that I bought. I guess these are called oval head, so you probably want a flat head, but basically they're an M5-.8 by 25 millimeter. So if you needed to replace them, those are the actual threads that are used in there, or if you wanted to get a tap to match that if you for some reason end up in the same situation as me. Okay, too, before I put this cassette back, I'm going to also want to go ahead and put some grease right in here. There was some grease in for this. If you wanted to, I guess you could also put the cassette in, put some grease in here, move this in and out, and you could try squirting some I guess carb cleaner or brake cleaner in here if you wanted to clean this out while you're moving these cables back and forth, but you just want to make sure that you re-lube them. I'm not going to go through that much trouble, but depending on how dirty it is or how gunked up it is, or if you have trouble sliding your sunroof back and forth, that would probably help lubricate it. You could also probably put some dry lube in there first if you wanted to as well. Okay, I've put the grease on the gearing and I've lubricated the cassette, and I've also put the grease up here, And basically this fits just like this. In here you got to line up the gears and everything. And then there's this screw right over here in the center there, and that needs to screw in to hold the cassette in place. So I'm going to do that. The cassette is now in place. I've screwed that in right there. And what you may want to do is temporarily put the handle on here and retract the sunroof and close it and and then pop it up the other way, so in the pop open position, to make sure that the cassette is installed properly and that the gears inside the cassette, if you took that all apart, are in the proper place. Because otherwise, once you put everything all together and you find out that it's incorrect, you're going to have to pull everything out and start all over again and get the gearing and everything correct with the cassette. Next, I'm going to roll back the sunroof, because in order to install this panel that covers everything right here, we need to have access to some screws which are inside the sunroof here. Okay, to put this cover piece in place, we got to make sure that we get this rubber grommet in place, and we pull down the seal here on each side to put back in place. And I'm going to start, I'll put it in place, position it. I'm going to put the little plastic visor holder piece that so you can unclip it if you need to flip it, and I'm going to put those in first, and then I'll start putting in the visors in over here. And then up here we have the screws and the wind deflector for the sunroof that needs to be put in. I've gone ahead and I've put these two little clips in. All I can tell you is start slowly, be delicate, because this cracks very easily. Take your time. All you can do is sort of just tuck and put this in, and leave it loose, and then you can tighten it down as you go. And then you got to work from the center out and over. I'm going to go ahead and put in the sun deflector next. Alright, the sun or wind deflector mounts up right in here on this, where this little metal part right here with the holes goes in. There's two long screws that go in these larger holes here that help hold this and keep this panel in place. You need to try and line up the holes for this as well. It's going to be a little bit of a tricky thing, and then you have to install these posts that go right here, and then they attach over here on those pins. These long screws actually go in first, and the cover goes on top of them. This holds the panel underneath, so you need to go ahead and put those in first, and then we'll go ahead and install the wind deflector. I've had to put some tape in here to line up all these holes. Probably a good idea to probably clean all this up so the tape holds in place, but I'm just going to throw it in here on top of this. I mean, you can trim out anything that hangs loose, or I guess you could put some like rubber cement or contact cement lightly in some spots here to hold that in place, and then that way everything will go back in the original holes. I've put in all the screws, and I started from the center, and I tuck under as I went along and worked my way out, and I've put them all in. They're secure now, and that's keeping the headliner pulled over and tucked in underneath this, and the tape held it in place. There's some points where it's sticking out, but hopefully that won't be an issue. And we don't see anything right here, so doesn't seem to be anything that would be attracting water. I was able to go ahead and get these arms in. If you can't push them in, I just put a little bit of grease on there. You don't want to put a whole lot because it attracts dirt, but just enough. And then I used something flat like this and a hammer, and I just gently tapped it in. And again, these you get the pin through the little hole there, you have to put them like this, and then they flip over like that. Just as a footnote, if you can't get the sunroof to close because of this wind deflector right here, you make sure that you got these installed on the right side. I had them installed the wrong way, and so had to flip-flop them, put them on the other side so that they the sunroof would close properly. Next is putting in the visors. Basically, you just take the piece and line up the holes in there. You may have to turn it to orient it to get to each of the screw. You put them in place and then screw these back in, and then you can also tighten down this as well and put it back in place. I've already gone ahead and put this one in, and then I need to put in the passenger side. The other visor is now installed in place and it's working. So we need to go ahead and put back the idiot lights, so to speak, or this panel here though with your warning lights. And basically this just you put that panel, you need to plug this back in, and then this should slide back in place. This has been deformed because of the fact that I had my mirror replaced, and it was a real devil to get out. But this mirror is just really held in place with the spring-loaded pins, and it just pops right out, and then you can pull it out. Really, to replace it, you should really remove the whole panel so you don't damage it. I've gone ahead and plugged that in, and basically this should just fit right in place. It just snaps in like that, and there you go. Next we need to reinstall this cover. This cover goes in like this, pops in place, and there's 2 screws that we need to go ahead and put in. Okay, here are the screws. The original screws are right here, and again, here's the red Loctite or thread locker. What I'm going to do is, I got the one replacement screw right here. The head's different than this. They did have the flat heads at Home Depot, but the zinc coating doesn't seem to be as nice. This seems to be a better product, and I couldn't find stainless steel. I guess you had to order those online. I'm just going to go ahead, and since it's inside the car, theoretically, there shouldn't be a whole lot of moisture and so forth, so that hopefully that won't be an issue with it rusting. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use this blue thread locker. I couldn't find the purple, which is low, which I think would probably be better in this scenario, but I'm going to use this medium, and I'm going to line these up, and I'm going to put the thread locker right there at the same point that the other ones, the original ones, were, because it's still on this screw that I drilled out. I'm going to go ahead and get that set, and then I'm going to go ahead and install the handle. The thread locker is now, I put it on. I'm going to let it sit for a little bit, then I'm going to go ahead and install the handle in the car. And hopefully this will hold, and should the handle happen to fail again, I mean, there's no telling. I mean, as cars get older and they get finicky, and sometimes it's hard to remove things, it could wear out and crack, and because it's Chinese too, may end up having to replace it. Hopefully this will be the last time though in this vehicle. I mean, the first one lasted 25 years, and so if the second one lasts that long, I in the car probably won't be here, but good enough just the same. Okay, I've gone ahead and I've put the handle in, I put 1 screw in, and I need to put in the other screw right here. Just keep in mind, here's the original piece, and here is the hole that I had to, or the screw that I had to drill out. So it needs to go in like this. So the deeper hole right here, or the deeper recess, needs to go towards the front of the car, and the one that's less right here needs to go to the back. And so I've installed it the same way, and so I need to go ahead and put in the other screw, and then I can put it on the cover for this. I've now installed the other screw, and so all I need to do is put the cover on with the screw. I've now put in the plastic cover, and it's held in by this screw, so I screwed it back in, and that's how you put everything back together. And then hopefully just test your sunroof, make sure it moves back and forth. If something doesn't go in correctly, you'll have to adjust it. But that's basically the nuts and bolts on how everything works. I hope this helps somebody, because it's always helpful to have some basic knowledge when you start tearing into things. Thanks, and catch you next time. Bye.